What if the biggest threat to Prince Harry's marriage isn't the tabloids, but a decision he feels he has no choice but to make? Let that sink in for a second. Because behind the headlines, behind the lawsuits, behind the royal titles and court filings, something far more personal has been unfolding. Quietly, painfully, and according to multiple reports, it has pushed Prince Harry to a point no one thought he would ever reach. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this. It's late. The house is quiet. Too quiet. Harry is alone with his thoughts, staring at documents that were never supposed to decide the fate of his marriage. Legal language. Cold wording. Pages that don't care about love, or vows, or promises whispered years ago. This fight, on the surface, looks simple. Prince Harry wants his armed security reinstated in the United Kingdom so he can safely bring his family home. That's the headline version. That's the legal argument. But here's the part no one likes to talk about. What if going home safely means going home alone? Sources close to the situation describe a deeply emotional dispute. Not a screaming match. Not a public blow-up. Something worse. A slow, grinding conflict where both sides believe they're right. And both sides are terrified of what giving in would mean. Ask yourself this. If you believed your family was unsafe, would you stop fighting? And if you believed returning to a place that hurt you could break you emotionally, would you agree to go back? That's the impossible crossroads Harry and Meghan are reportedly standing at right now. Harry sees security as protection, as responsibility, as proof that he failed once before and refuses to fail again. To him, this fight isn't about status. It's about survival. It's about not repeating history. But Meghan, according to those familiar with the tension, she sees something very different. A return to old trauma, old systems, old power dynamics that once made her feel trapped, exposed, and unprotected in ways no security detail could fix. And here's where the story takes a turn. Because this isn't just about whether they go back to the UK. It's about whether their visions of the future still align at all. Friends say the conversations have grown heavier. Longer pauses, fewer reassurances, words carefully chosen, and one question hanging in the air that no couple ever wants to ask out loud. What if love isn't enough to bridge this gap? Harry's legal fight has reached a point where decisions can no longer be postponed. And with every step forward in court, something at home is reportedly pulling in the opposite direction. This is the moment where fairy tales crack, where duty collides with marriage, where choosing one path feels like betraying the other. And according to insiders, when Harry realized that winning this battle might cost him the one thing he's fought to protect since walking away from royal life, everything changed. Because what came next wasn't a compromise. It was an announcement. And that announcement may have pushed their marriage to the brink. What if this fight was never really about bodyguards? That's the uncomfortable question sitting at the center of everything Prince Harry has been doing behind the scenes. Because on paper, this is a legal dispute. A challenge over police protection. A matter of procedure and precedent. But emotionally, it's something else entirely. Harry didn't wake up one day and decide to reopen old wounds for fun. This battle traces back to something far deeper. A sense of unfinished business. A fear that history has a way of repeating itself when you least expect it. Think about it. He grew up surrounded by security. Not as privilege, but as necessity. Cameras everywhere. Crowds pressing in. And one defining loss that taught him, at a very young age, what happens when protection fails. That lesson never leaves you. It doesn't fade with time. It hardens. So when Harry stepped away from royal life, he didn't just leave titles behind. He left a system that, flawed as it was, provided a shield. And now, years later, with children of his own, that old fear has reportedly come roaring back. Here's the contradiction no one likes to acknowledge. Harry walked away to protect his family. And now he's fighting to go back, to protect his family. Doesn't that sound like a man torn in two? In court filings and interviews, he frames the issue as safety, risk assessments, threat levels. But people close to him say it's also about legitimacy, about being able to stand in his home country without feeling exposed, about not being the only royal who has to calculate danger every time he lands. Ask yourself this. If you believed your children were at risk, would you care how irrational it looked to outsiders? This fight escalated quickly. Appeals, rejections, renewed efforts. Each legal setback didn't cool Harry down. It seemed to push him harder. almost as if losing made the stakes feel even higher. But while Harry was focused on courtrooms and policies, something else was happening quietly at home. Because for Meghan, this wasn't a technical issue. It wasn't a chess match with the system. It was personal, emotional, and deeply tied to experiences she never wanted to relive. Friends say every step Harry took toward bringing the family back to the UK felt like a step backward for her sense of peace. The place he sees as home, she remembers as hostile ground. And here's where the tension sharpened. Harry didn't just want the option to return. He wanted certainty. He wanted guarantees. He wanted a future where his children could move freely between worlds. Meghan, reportedly, wanted distance, stability, control over the environment around her family. Two people, two truths, one marriage. So what happens when one partner sees security as safety and the other sees it as a door back into pain? This is where compromise starts to fail, because you can't split a future in half. And according to those close to the situation, as Harry pushed harder for a path home, Meghan began pulling further away from the idea altogether. Not loudly, not publicly, but unmistakably. And that's when Harry realized something unsettling. Winning this fight might mean losing her. But what he did next wasn't retreat. It was a line in the sand. Because the moment Harry stopped treating this as a legal issue and started treating it as a life decision, the marriage entered dangerous territory. And what he would say next would force Meghan to confront a reality she never planned for, and neither did he. What happens when the same decision makes one partner feel safe and the other feel trapped? That's the quiet storm that reportedly settled over Harry and Meghan's marriage as the security fight dragged on. Because while the outside world debated policies and privileges, inside the house the conversation sounded very different. Shorter sentences, longer silences. At first, it didn't look like conflict. It looked like caution. Meghan asking questions, pausing, reframing, wanting reassurance. But over time, those questions reportedly stopped sounding curious and started sounding final. Why now? Why again? Why does it have to be the UK? And here's the emotional contradiction that sits at the center of this chapter. Harry sees the United Kingdom as unfinished business, a place he must reclaim on his own terms, with his family safe beside him. He believes that securing protection there closes a chapter that's been left open since the day he walked away. Meghan, according to those close to her, sees the UK as a chapter she barely survived the first time. That's not drama. That's trauma. For her, returning isn't symbolic. It's visceral. Memories of isolation, of scrutiny, of feeling watched, judged, and unprotected in ways no armed officer could fix. And no legal victory could erase that emotional memory. So when Harry spoke about safety, Meghan reportedly heard exposure. When Harry talked about responsibility, she heard regression. Ask yourself this. If a place once broke you emotionally, would you trust it just because the rules changed? This is where the marriage reportedly began to strain in ways that don't show up in headlines. Not explosive arguments, not ultimatums, but something more corrosive. Distance. Harry leaning into purpose. Meghan leaning into self-preservation. Friends say the conversations became circular. Harry explaining why this mattered to him. Meghan explaining why it frightened her. Both listening, neither yielding. And then there was the silence. That's the part people underestimate. Silence isn't peace. It's pressure without release. It's resentment learning how to sit quietly. Somewhere along the way, Meghan reportedly stopped seeing this as a shared decision and started seeing it as Harry's decision. And that shift matters. Because once a partner feels overruled instead of heard, the relationship enters dangerous territory. Harry, on the other hand, began to feel something just as unsettling. That his fear wasn't being taken seriously. That his role as a father was being weighed against emotional comfort and losing. Imagine carrying the belief that danger is real, imminent, and preventable, and feeling like the person you love most doesn't see it the same way. That disconnect doesn't fade. It sharpens. So here they were. Not enemies. Not strangers. But two people staring at the same future and seeing entirely different threats. And then came the moment that changed the tone of everything. Because according to insiders, Harry stopped framing the issue as a discussion. He framed it as a direction. And when Meghan realized this wasn't just a debate anymore, but a path Harry intended to take, the word that had been hovering unspoken finally entered the conversation. Not shouted, Not threatened, but acknowledged. Divorce. And once that word exists in the air, it never really leaves. Because what came next wasn't anger. It was clarity. And that clarity would lead Harry to make an announcement that forced both of them to confront how close they were to the edge, whether they wanted to admit it or not. What if the most dangerous moment in a marriage isn't a fight, but a calm decision? That's where this story takes its sharpest turn. Because after weeks, maybe months, of tension, explanations, and emotional gridlock, Prince Harry reportedly did something that stunned those closest to him. He stopped asking. This wasn't an outburst. There were no raised voices, no dramatic walkouts. In fact, that's what made it so unsettling. According to insiders, the shift was almost serene, focused, determined. Harry had reached a conclusion. And once a person reaches that point, conversation becomes confirmation, not debate. The announcement itself wasn't delivered to the public first. It didn't come through press releases or interviews. It happened privately, in a moment that would later ripple outward with consequences no one could fully control. Sources describe it as simple, direct, almost painfully honest. Harry made it clear that bringing his family back to the UK safely was no longer a hypothetical future. It was a direction he intended to pursue, with or without full agreement. Let that land. Not because he wanted conflict, but because, in his mind, delaying any longer felt irresponsible. From his perspective, this wasn't choosing the UK over Meghan. It was choosing certainty over paralysis, action over fear, a belief that leadership sometimes means making the call no one wants to make. But from Meghan's side, that same announcement reportedly landed like an ultimatum. Not because Harry used threatening language, but because the subtext was impossible to ignore. If this path moves forward, something else may not survive it. Ask yourself this. Is it still a partnership if one person decides the destination alone? Friends say Meghan didn't explode. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. Instead, she went quiet. And silence, in moments like this, is never neutral. It's processing. It's protecting. It's reassessing everything you thought was settled. This is where the emotional stakes spiked. Harry felt relief. For the first time in months, his direction was clear. Meghan felt destabilized. For the first time, the future felt imposed rather than shared. And that gap matters. Because relationships don't usually end in chaos. They end in moments where one person realizes the life they're being asked to live no longer feels like their own. Insiders say this was the moment Meghan began to emotionally step back. Not dramatically, subtly. Conversations shorter. Decisions delayed. Emotional energy redirected elsewhere. Harry noticed. And here's the contradiction that makes this story so difficult. Harry wasn't trying to leave his marriage, but he was no longer willing to stop his life for it. That realization alone can fracture even the strongest bond. The word divorce wasn't suddenly weaponized. It didn't become a threat. It became a possibility, a concept both of them now had to acknowledge existed, not because they wanted it, but because ignoring it felt dishonest. And once a marriage reaches that point, everything changes. Every decision feels heavier. Every silence feels louder. Every compromise feels temporary. This is where the public story and the private reality begin to diverge. Because while the world waits for official statements and smiling appearances, the real story is happening behind closed doors, in moments no camera will ever capture. And according to those closest to the situation, the next phase won't be about security or court cases at all. It will be about whether two people who once walked away from everything together can still walk forward in the same direction. Because the next move Prince Harry makes won't just determine where he lives. It may determine who he lives without. So here we are, back at the question we started with. What if the biggest threat to Prince Harry's marriage was never the tabloids, but a decision he believed he could no longer delay? Because when you strip away the royal language, the lawsuits, the headlines, what's left is something painfully human. Two people who once made the same choice for the same reason, now standing on opposite sides of the future. Harry's fight for security was supposed to bring peace, stability, closure. Instead, it has exposed a fault line that may have been there longer than anyone realized. One that runs straight through the heart of his marriage. Think about the irony. He left the UK to protect his wife. Now he wants to return to protect his children. Both choices came from the same place. Fear, love, responsibility. And yet, they are pulling him in completely different directions. Meghan, by all accounts, isn't reacting out of spite or stubbornness. She's reacting out of memory, out of lived experience, out of a deep need to never feel that exposed again. For her, the idea of returning isn't neutral. It's emotional. It's heavy. It's a door she thought was permanently closed. And Harry? He's reacting out of legacy, out of history, out of the belief that failing to act now could mean failing his family forever. That fear doesn't negotiate politely. It demands certainty. This is why the situation feels so volatile. There's no villain here. No simple betrayal. Just two realities that no longer fully overlap. And when Harry made that quiet announcement, the one that shifted the conversation from discussion to direction, it didn't just change the tone of the marriage. It redefined it. Because once one partner decides they cannot turn back, the other is forced to ask a terrifying question. Can I follow them? Or do I have to let them go? That's where things reportedly stand now. Not with a signed decision. Not with public statements. But with a pause so heavy it feels like a verdict waiting to be read. The world may keep watching court rulings and royal updates, but the real outcome will be decided in moments no one sees. Late-night conversations. Long silences. Private realizations. Will compromise still be possible? Will one of them yield? Or has the future already split in two? One thing is clear. Whatever happens next won't just reshape their marriage. It will redefine who Prince Harry is willing to be. And what he's willing to lose, to feel at peace with himself. And the most unsettling part? The decision may already be made. We just haven't seen it yet. Because the next chapter in this story won't begin in a courtroom, or a palace, or a press release. It will begin with a choice. And once that choice is revealed, nothing will ever look the same again.